Hello and welcome to this edition of Eye on Africa. I'm Charlie James, and these are the top stories. A landmark punishment for the use of child soldiers, a former warlord in the Democratic Republic of Congo, liable for $10 million in reparations. 7 years after the Tunisian Revolution began, people in the country are still lighting themselves on fire to protest conditions in the country. We look at one such woman's story. And can art classes help pull children out of poverty in Uganda? One artist there is sharing his talents in hopes of reducing the number of children living on the streets. It's the largest reparation of its kind. Convicted Congolese warlord Thomas Lubanga is liable for $10 million in compensation to the child soldiers he recruited. International war crimes judges made the decision on Friday. Wasim Cornet has more in this report.
Justice for hundreds of children who were forced to fight in a war started by adults. The International Criminal Court ruling that Congolese warlord Thomas Lubanga is liable for $10 million in reparations to former child soldiers. Lubanga had been sentenced to 14 years in jail in 2012 after having been found guilty of abducting boys and girls and forcing them into military service. The reparations are only intended to compensate 425 victims, which have been identified by the court.
The 425 victims are just a sample, and hundreds or even thousands of additional victims have been harmed by the crimes for which Mr. Lubanga has been convicted.
But Lubanga, who was expected to be freed in 2020, will not be paying the reparations. The sum of $10 million will be distributed by the Trust Fund for Victims, which depends entirely on donations from ICC member states. Lubanga was a key player in the bloody Ituri conflict, which took place in the early 2000s. As many as 60,000 people were killed during the war.
The ruling party of Zimbabwe has endorsed Emmerson Mnangagwa as its candidate for the 2018 elections. At a special Congress meeting Friday, ZANU-PF members also sealed the fate of ousted President Robert Mugabe, affirming the former leader's expulsion after 37 years in power. Newly inaugurated President Mnangagwa declared the party is on a new trajectory.
As a political party, ZANU-PF must always compete for office through pitting itself against opposition parties in elections which must be credible, free, fair, and transparent.
Elections are currently planned for the end of July, though Mnangagwa has said a vote may be held sooner than expected. Meanwhile, Robert Mugabe has been spotted in public for the first time since he was forcibly removed from office last month. Photographed leaving a hospital in Singapore on Friday, the 93-year-old was in the country for a scheduled medical checkup. Mugabe's former spokesman said Thursday the visit is, quote, part of his package as a retired president to travel overseas. The former leader has reportedly battled prostate cancer. And South Africa is at a crossroads. The ruling African National Congress has overwhelmingly won every presidential election since 1994. That was the first when people of every race were allowed to vote. But scandals have led to the party's support declining. And now this weekend, the ANC is expected to announce a new leader to take over from Jacob Zuma. The race is between Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, a former cabinet minister and ex-wife of President Zuma. But division within the party also threatens its future.
We're very optimistic. We're not really planning for in a split in a way that says, well, if they want to go, then let them go. We don't want that kind of approach. We want an approach that says, there's a lot that we can do together. We need everybody inside the ANC. We need even those who have left the ANC to come back. We also need to make sure that the ANC reaches out to society.
You hear a lot of the rhetoric about unification. We're voting for unity. We need unity. But actually the people leading aren't unified themselves. The people leading are either, driven by a legacy they want to leave or follow or leave behind, or their own private interest. And obviously, the huge stakes that everyone seems to be forgetting is the fact that our incumbent president is still faced with an uncertainty about his 800 or 700 charges.
Whoever wins this weekend will either become president in 2019 or the first ANC candidate to lose the presidency. The Tunisian Revolution famously began when a street vendor lit himself on fire in protest. Now, 7 years later, people still self-immolate in Tunisia to protest against poverty or unemployment. There were at least 104 such cases last year alone. Our reporters Lila Blaise and Laurent Bestacher take a closer look at one woman's story.
Scenes of anger reminiscent of the Tunisian Revolution. Even the slogans are the same. These men and women took to the streets after Radia Mishergi, a mother of 5, set herself on fire.
Raja was our sister, and she died for nothing. Nobody helped her, neither the government nor social workers. She couldn't take it anymore. If she'd found a way to feed herself, she wouldn't have done what she did.
Like many Tunisians, Radia was unemployed. And a few months ago, her welfare checks suddenly stopped coming.
Why did they take her welfare away? I don't know. Clearly they didn't come here to see us and our situation. Our standard of living is below zero. We have nothing. We can barely eat.
But authorities say the procedures were simply slowed down.
We didn't make any technical mistakes in our work. And there's been 2 investigations, one by the Interior Ministry and the other by Social Affairs. So everything was in order.
It was a case of self-immolation that sparked Tunisia's Arab Spring in 2011, a gesture many have emulated since.
The individual is suffering and is thinking of suicide to end this suffering. But there's also a sacrificial dimension. They do it in public places. It's a form of social protest, and it will be watched and relayed by the media. It's a message.
Radia Mishergi's desperate act can be seen as a symbol of Tunisia's frustrations in a country where over 15% of the population remains unemployed 7 years after the revolution.
It is back to square one for more than 170 migrants returned to Mali on Friday. The men, women, and children were repatriated after being held in abusive detention conditions in Libya. The International Organization for Migration hopes to return 15,000 migrants stranded in Libya to their country of origin by next February. And finally, an artist in Uganda is using his talent to try to reduce the number of children living on the streets of Kampala. The hope is that free art classes will inspire new talent and help tackle poverty.
Every night, dozens of students gather in this informal school in Kampala to attend drawing and painting classes. A majority of these children live on the streets and are discovering new ways to express themselves through art. For Rodney Kigundu, one of the school's founders, the project's main aim is to provide these youths with opportunities for the future.
We saw these kids on the streets who used to beg, and right now they still beg, asking for handouts, and yet we could give them something that could impact their lives and also make their lives better and make them earn a living out of it.
Here, students can learn printing, sketching, and other basic skills, and the materials they use are entirely paid for by the sale of their artwork, a way to make them more autonomous and to help them save up for other projects.
I like pictures, and I hope that when I paint beautiful pictures, people will appreciate them and buy them. That way, I can make enough money to stay in school, buy some clothes and some food.
There are currently around 13,000 street children in Uganda, and many are in permanent danger of being trafficked, molested, or forced into child labor. Rodney and his colleagues hope their art club can help some of them forget life on the streets by offering them a safe space to play, learn, and make new friends.
Well, that's all for this edition of Eye on Africa. Stay with us. There's more news coming up.